So we truly are in the multiverse era, but what is really interesting is that DC alone has got so many entries across its portfolio of movies, TV shows, animation, video games, and now we've got another trilogy coming, which is now called Justice League: The Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, which, like I said, is really hilarious, as we've seen the multiverse very recently in The Flash, in Titans, in the Crisis on Infinite Earths Arrowverse event, of course happening a lot in the DC animated movie universe space, and we've also had original animated movies dedicated to the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, and now, like I said, we're getting it in the Tomorrowverse, and the Tomorrowverse has been interesting lately, hasn't it? As it's got a couple of good entries, for example, Man of Tomorrow, Green Lantern, Beware My Power, and of course Legion of Superheroes, which actually made my top 10 movie list of 2023. I will link that video in the description box below, but what is also really interesting is that DC are fast tracking the Tomorrowverse into all of the Crisis on Infinite Earth storyline. Maybe because they just want to wrap up all of the Tomorrowverse stuff before James Gunn's DC Universe comes, where everything will be properly integrated. And like I said, the Tomorrowverse hasn't been as successful as his DC AMU counterpart, so maybe they just want to wrap it all up and just move on. And maybe they'll also have Snyderverse characters in there too, in the second and third installment, as technically they are out there in one of the Earths. So how is the first part movie? So it definitely feels like the first entrant into a trilogy of storylines. One of the things that I really liked about the Tomorrowverse is that it's younger iterations of all of the different characters, which I feel like has been really, really interesting in terms of creating a new timeline. And it is really, really brilliant in terms of what happens when these particular characters meet other versions of their variants. So for example, what happens to a Batman that meets a version of him that didn't actually take on Dick Grayson and actually sees this as being irresponsible? What happens to a Superman that is speaking to a Superman in which Lois Lane has passed away and now he is actually with Wonder Woman? All of those little questions I think are explored really, really well. And I cannot wait to see them explored even more in the second and third installment, as this first installment definitely feels very Barry Allen centric, and I feel like Matt Bomer totally brings Barry Allen to life in such a good way. He was brilliant voice acting selection, as he just brings him to life so well. And as all of the Flashpoint multiverse arc based storylines are to do with the Flash, I feel like it's the right decision to make it all about this character, and we have the anti-Monitor wave being the thing that is now destroying all of the Earths. And it's a really interesting question in terms of, is this a sentient thing or is it completely natural, which I'm sure we'll get the answers to in the second and third installment. And the awful Justice League War World movie ended with the Harbinger collecting certain characters, and that thread is continued into this movie. So I think, like I said, it's really, really cool to see a group of characters, which it might be trickier to do in live action. Actually, in animation, you can really do anything that you want to do. And I know it was a running joke back in the DC comic book days in terms of them always copying Marvel, but I feel like you can really tell in this movie in particular just how similar certain characters are. For example, Spectrum, the Watcher, so many of them, you can really see the Marvel version of them in this movie. For example, the Monitor is literally this world's version of the Watcher, and of course we've seen the Watcher so much in What If Season 1 and Season 2, and spread out in a couple of other live action appearances. And because Marvel Studios are so many years ahead of DC and have been so successful, it feels a little bit like DC are copying them, as the Monitor has to intervene to basically save all of the universes, which of course we've seen the Watcher do already. And it was really cool to see the Crime Syndicate, which is basically an evil version of the Justice League, although we've seen so many versions of the Justice League now, for example in The Boys, and of course in Invincible, and then I'm sure we're going to be seeing it with Sentry and Marvel Studios. So for like evil versions of Superman and the Justice League have been done so much already, but at least it's nice to see a faithful, proper JLA version of them. And as Barry Allen's The Flash is so pivotal and so centric to all of the multiverse-based storylines, I think it was really cool to really connect with this character, and this version is so much better than Ezra Miller's version of The Flash. Maybe not as good as Grant Gustin's, as I absolutely love his portrayal of The Flash, but I feel like I said, Matt Bomer does a really good job with the material that he is given. And I think it's really interesting how certain characters in the beginning, you're seeing them as a bit of a villain, and then then as the storyline progresses, you're like, oh, actually, they're not as bad as we thought they were. And I think it's interesting how Lex Luthor really is a cheater that will never change its spots, as it will always be an evil guy. And I think Amazo, the AI sentient robot, was really, really cool, especially in the time in which AI robots have been so pivotal and so talkable. Although we've seen so many characters having the parasite type abilities in terms of stealing powers from other characters, but his focus is to help mankind or humankind. So he only does this to meta superhumans, which I thought was really, really cool. But he is such a wicked character. And because of the Speed Force, we see the timeline across multiple different versions of Barry Allen's storyline. So it's really, really cool to see the formation of the Justice League and Barry and Iris's wedding as well as a pivotal point in terms of something that goes wrong. And one thing that I did love in terms of a consistency with Barry Allen's attitude is that he always feels like the Speed Force is something that can basically save the day for him, which we've of course seen very recently in the movie and in live action in terms of the TV show. And over here, he is trying to preserve the time that he has with Iris. But obviously two things then come up. One, which is that time will always catch up with you. And B, you can only have a good thing for so long. So actually, Barry Allen's character portrayal in this movie was really, really deep. I feel like Batman was good in terms of playing all of the key early years Batman aspects in this movie. And I always remember that awesome line from Ben Affleck when he was like, look, my superpower is that I am rich. And you really can see that in his portrayal here. I would say though that Jensen Ackles' voice acting just made that character so monotone and so bland, and I just feel like he could have injected a little bit more into his portrayal of him. Although seeing a young Batman meeting his future kids' counterparts were really, really good, and I feel like that aspect of the storyline was really, really clever. Superman didn't have that much to do in this first installment, but him seeing a future version of himself was really, really cool. And I feel like it's really interesting how the Tomorrowverse really has defined Hal Jordan to be a bit of a douchebag. So actually he wasn't part of the original lineup, and instead obviously they went down the Jon Stewart route. But I just feel like there's just so much disgrace being focused towards Hal Jordan lately, and I'm just really hopeful that James Gunn's version of Hal Jordan would finally do him justice. And of course this is the first installment of a series of movies, so I feel like it was really clever how right at the end they did show that not everything is fully resolved yet, which is of course going to lead into the second movie. And I'm just so here for it. I can't wait for more crossovers, more cameos, more team-ups taking place, and I'm just really intrigued to see whether or not they're actually going to wrap up the entire Tomorrowverse by the end of the third installment, like I said, to allow James Gunn to totally dominate everything with the DCU across all of the mediums, TV shows, movies, video games, and animation alike. Although he is continuing Elseworld storylines with Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson, and of course we've got Joaquin Phoenix, so maybe the Tomorrowverse will continue. But as far as this movie was concerned, I really, really enjoyed it. I feel like it could have been a little bit stronger in certain parts, but as far as the first installment goes, as far as the trilogy is concerned, I feel like it was really, really good, and I just loved exploring more about the Flash character in this first installment. And so for all of those reasons, I'm going to give Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1 a solid 7 out of 10. Now I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of this film? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.